The first lie about the Wild West is that the danger was easy to see. A gunman in the doorway, a rider on the ridge, a saloon going silent when the wrong man walked in. That is the version people remember because it is clean. It has a villain. It has a weapon. It has a beginning and an end. The real West did not work like that. The real West killed people with things that a clear stream, a cheap wool shirt, a shovel with the wrong price on it, a beautiful blue sky at noon, a white shirt hanging in a laundry shack, a handful of dust rising behind a wagon wheel. The frontier was sold as freedom. In practice, it behaved more like a machine. It took in bodies, labor, animals, land, and hope. Then it ground them down slowly. One hidden mechanism at a time. A person could survive the trail and still die because the trail had already carved their lungs apart. A woman could earn more than the men around her and still be chemically burned to death by the work that made her independent. Children could leave school in daylight and freeze within sight of their own front doors. A man could cross a continent chasing gold and discover that the gold field had been designed to make him poorer every day. That was the first secret of the frontier. It did not need to look like hell, to function like one. Start with the thing every traveler needed before anything else. Water in the paintings. The prairie stream is pure. In real life, it was often a shared drainage system for people. Oxen, horses, bison, refuse, and disease. Wagon trains followed the same routes because the same routes had water. That meant thousands of animals and thousands of humans kept pressing their bodies, waste, and sickness into the same narrow lifelines. A desperate traveler would see clear water and read it as safety. But clear did not mean clean. The invisible world inside that water could be worse than any outlaw camp. Parasites, bacteria, and intestinal disease moved through the frontier long before a pistol was drawn. A person might drink from a stream where animals had churned the bank upstream, then carry the damage inside them for weeks. Hunger could become constant. Weight could fall away. Strength could vanish from a body that was eating as much as it could find. The person looked alive, walked alive, worked alive, and still had something inside them stealing the food before their own organs could use it. The body became a camp for an enemy nobody could see. And then came the doctor. Frontier medicine often treated the human body less like a patient and more like a battlefield. If something invisible was believed to be inside you, the solution was to attack it with whatever harsh substance seemed powerful enough to win. Turpentine lye, mercury, arsenic, bleeding, burning, purging. The logic was simple, and that was exactly what made it terrifying. If the illness was strong, the cure had to be stronger. For internal parasites, some frontier treatments used corrosive mixtures meant to force the invader out. Too little and the thing remained. Too much and the treatment began destroying the person. The stomach, throat, and intestines could be scarred in the name of recovery. A patient could survive the original affliction and spend the rest of their life with a digestive system permanently damaged by the cure. That pattern repeats across the entire frontier. The West did not just injure people. It offered cures that often finished the job. Even clothing could become a habitat for suffering. Heavy wool was prized because it held warmth and lasted through punishing work. But those same thick seams held heat, sweat, dirt, and lice. Soldiers, miners, travelers, and homesteaders lived with body lice so constantly that the infestation became almost ordinary. The insects gathered at waistbands, collars, armpits, and seams, feeding until the skin became raw. People scratched until they bled. Open sores met unwashed cloth. Bacteria entered. A bite became an infection. An infection became blood poisoning. A minor irritation could become a death sentence because the frontier had no antibiotics, no reliable sanitation, and very little mercy. People wrote about lice, sores, coughing, diarrhea, fever, and exhaustion in the same dry tone they used for weather. Not because it was minor, because the frontier lowered the threshold of horror. It taught people to treat the breakdown of their own bodies as routine. Then the land entered their lungs. The covered wagon is one of the cleanest images in American memory. A white canvas arch moving through open grass. A family going west under a bright sky. But a real wagon train was not a postcard. It was a moving dust factory. Dozens of wagons rolled over the same dry trail. Hundreds of hooves followed. In alkaline regions, the dust could be sharp, mineral, heavy, and relentless. It rose behind the lead wagons and hung at breathing height, exactly where the people had to walk. Most pioneers did not ride all day inside the wagon. The ride was brutal, jarring, and often reserved for the very young, the old, the sick, or the dying. Everyone else walked. Hour after hour, day after day, month after month. They walked inside the trail itself. The dust did not need to choke a person immediately to kill them. The most dangerous damage was cumulative. Fine mineral particles worked their way deep into the lungs. The body tried to protect itself with inflammation and scar tissue. Healthy breathing, the lungs lost reserve. A traveler might arrive in Oregon or California, build a cabin, unpack a trunk, and believe the worst was behind them. But the trail had not ended. It had moved inside their chest. Then winter came. A cold, a fever, a mild infection that a healthy body might have survived. But the scarred lungs had no margin left. Families who had beaten river crossings, starvation, accidents, and months of exhaustion could lose children or parents after arrival because the journey had already done its work. That is the real cruelty of the trail. It did not always kill at the dramatic moment. Sometimes it waited until the person felt safe. And once the survivors reached the places where fortune was supposed to begin, the next machine was already waiting. Money. The myth says the frontier gave any determined man a chance to rise. The arithmetic says something else. During the gold rush, the people who most reliably made money were not always the men digging for gold. They were the people selling the tools, food, lodging, freight, and credit that the diggers needed to stay alive. A shovel that cost almost nothing back east could become a $15 necessity in a gold camp. A single egg could cost $1. Boots could reach $50. A prospector might stand all day in freezing water and pull out only a few dollars of dust. Then hand most of it back for food, shelter, replacement tools, laundry, medicine, and debt. The West promised independence, then charged rent on every breath. This was not bad luck. It was structure. Merchants and transport operators understood that desperate men far from home were captive customers. They had already spent everything to get there. They could not easily leave. They could not easily shop elsewhere. The camp did not need to steal from them in the dark. It could bankrupt them in daylight, one inflated necessity at a time. In the larger mines, the trap became even cleaner. Workers were paid in company scrip instead of real money. Scrip could be spent only at the company store. The store set the prices. The mine set the wages. Wages. When the prices rose faster than the pay, the worker borrowed against the future. Once he owed the company, leaving became nearly impossible. He had no real currency. No independent savings. No easy exit from the camp. He was not chained to the mine by iron. He was chained by accounting, and beneath that accounting, the lungs kept filling with rock dust. Hard, rock miners breathed silica, metal particles, sulfur, lead, arsenic, and whatever else the mountain released when blasted open. Their bodies became filters for profit. By 40, a miner could be old in the lungs, even if his face still looked young. He coughed, weakened, and slowly lost the ability to draw breath. When he could no longer work, the system did not mourn him. It replaced him. That is one of the ugliest truths about the frontier economy. It did not merely use labor. It consumed the laborer and called the remains personal failure. But not every successful operator in the mining West wore a gun or swung a pick. One of the most important figures in the camps has been pushed almost completely out of the legend. The laundress, she does not fit the cowboy myth, which is exactly why she matters. In a mining town, clean clothing was not cosmetic. It was survival, status, sanitation, and business. A miner's wool shirt carried sweat, lice, grease, mud, and mineral dust. Washing it was dangerous industrial labor disguised as domestic work. A skilled laundress could charge astonishing prices for a shirt because everyone understood, even if they did not say it, that the work was brutal. She began by making lye. Water passed through hardwood ash produced a harsh alkaline liquid. That lye could become crude soap when boiled with rendered animal fat. But the margin for error was tiny, too weak. And it failed against the grease and ore dust. Too strong. And it ate the cloth. Then came the washing itself. Boiling vats, caustic water, wet wool, coal heat, and bad ventilation. In summer, a laundry shack could become an oven. Steam rose off the vats. But it was not harmless steam. It carried lye, soot, dirt, minerals, and the chemical residue of the camp. The laundress breathed what the town wanted removed. Her hands told the story first. Day after day in alkaline water, the skin thinned, cracked, split, and reopened. The fissures deepened until the hands became living wounds. The condition was remembered as the red hand. But that phrase sounds too neat for what it was. A chemical burn that never got time to heal. Then the lungs followed. Caustic vapor and mineral dust inflamed the airways. The cough deepened, the sputum darkened. A woman who had built an independent income by cleaning the camp could be poisoned by the very dirt she removed from other people's clothes. A white shirt left her shack looking civilized. Her body paid the bill. This is where the frontier myth begins to rot from the inside. So many of its symbols were only clean because somebody else absorbed the filth. The miner looked respectable because a woman burned her hands. The banker looked secure because men were trapped in scrip. The rail line looked triumphant because invisible laborers hung over cliffs with explosives. The town looked orderly because violence was aimed at whoever threatened property. Even the water could change its method of attack depending on where a traveler stood. On the Eastern Trail, contamination brought cholera. Waste entered the water, travelers drank downstream, and the disease could collapse a healthy adult in hours. The body emptied itself so violently that blood volume crashed. Skin changed color. Eyes sank. Strength disappeared. Death could come before a family had time to understand what had happened. And once again, medicine could make disaster worse. Bleeding a cholera patient, already dying from fluid loss, was like opening a second door for death. Farther west, thirst met chemistry. In the high desert, a pool could look like salvation and be saturated with alkali minerals. To a person cracked by heat and dust, the water's clarity was a trap. Drink deeply, and the stomach could revolt. Vomiting, pain, bleeding, and collapse could follow. Draft animals driven mad by thirst could drink from the same pool and die within hours. Lose the oxen, and a family did not just lose property. It lost movement. A wagon without animals became a coffin for belongings. The frontier did not need to block the road. It could poison the only thing that made the road possible. Then, there was the weather. The Great Plains could turn from mercy to execution with a speed that feels almost impossible now. On January 12, 1888, the day later remembered as the school children's blizzard. The morning felt unusually warm after brutal cold. Parents relaxed. Children went to school in lighter clothing. Farmers left shelter. The sky gave people permission to trust it. Then the front arrived. The temperature plunged. Wind slammed across the plains. Loose snow lifted from the ground and became a moving wall. Visibility vanished. A schoolhouse, a barn, a farmhouse, a front door only yards away could disappear as completely as if the earth had swallowed it. The cruelest part was distance. In clear weather, 50 yards was nothing. In a whiteout, 50 yards became a continent. Teachers had to decide whether to keep children inside buildings with limited heat or lead them toward nearby shelter through a world they could no longer see. Some groups stepped outside and lost direction almost instantly. People walked circles in schoolyards. Children froze close enough to safety that the distance is painful to imagine. The storm did not care about courage. It did not care who was young, who was brave, who prayed, who ran, or who almost made it. That is the frontier pattern again. The body trapped inside a mechanism bigger than willpower. The same was true in violence. The movies make frontier wounds look clean because clean deaths are easier to sell. But real wounds were long, dirty, infected, and technically complicated. An arrow or bullet did not simply create a dramatic ending. It created a medical crisis in a world with dirty tools, limited anesthesia, and little understanding of infection. Arrow wounds especially could become nightmares of removal. If the head lodged inside flesh and detached from the shaft, pulling backward could tear tissue further. In some cases, the point had to be pushed through the body and removed from the opposite side. If it struck bone or lodged too deep, a doctor might probe blindly with instruments that carried dirt, spores, and bacteria into the wound. Survival could mean gangrene. Treatment could mean agony. A minor injury could become a weak, long death. This is the part of frontier violence the legend removes. It keeps the gunshot and deletes the smell. Meanwhile, the conquest of the West was becoming less like wandering and more like industry. The railroad is remembered through the golden spike, a clean photograph, a ceremonial moment, a nation joined. But the track did not lay itself across empty romance. It required men to hang from cliffs, blast granite, shovel snow, tunnel through mountains, and handle explosives that could turn a worksite into smoke. Chinese laborers on the Central Pacific were pushed into some of the deadliest work. At cliff faces in the Sierra Nevada, men could be lowered in baskets to drill blasting holes into rock. They packed powder, set fuses, and depended on ropes, timing, weather, and luck to come back up alive. Later, even more unstable explosives increased the risk. A slip, a temperature change, a shock, and a body could disappear from the record as if it had never been there. Segregated camps made erasure easier. The labor was essential. The deaths were not always counted with equal seriousness. The railroad could become a symbol of national destiny because the cost had been pushed into categories the nation preferred not to see. Land followed the rails. Water followed the land. Springs, creeks, and water rights became assets. The machine that moved people across the West also seized the resources that made life possible there. Indigenous communities and wildlife that depended on those water sources faced a new form of conquest, Not just military, but logistical. Control the water, control the future, and when the bison were slaughtered, even death became an industry. The bison were not merely animals on a landscape. They were the center of a living system: food, material, movement, culture, ecology, and power. Remove the herds, and the plains nations could be starved, displaced, and forced into dependence. Then the remains were monetized. Bones scattered across the prairie were collected by the ton, stacked near rail lines, and shipped east. They became fertilizer, industrial carbon, sugar, refining material, and bone ash for fine goods. The dead West was ground down and sold back to the world as agriculture, sweetness, and elegance. Think about that exchange. A living grassland was turned into white sugar. A keystone species was turned into tableware. A continental ecosystem was converted into polite domestic luxury. That is not just destruction. That is refinement as camouflage. The same camouflage shaped the myth itself. Buffalo Bill understood something powerful. Once the real frontier was dying, the fake frontier could become more profitable than the real one. His Wild West shows offered audiences an ordered spectacle, bright costumes, staged attacks, noble danger, clean heroism, and a West with all the mud, disease, corporate hunger, and racial violence polished away. Even the clothing told the lie. Pristine buckskins on a real frontier would not stay pristine for long. But on stage, whiteness mattered. It told audiences they were not looking at survival. They were looking at purified memory, and they wanted it. Industrial city crowds, trapped in soot and factories, were hungry for a myth of open air and fearless men. The show gave them exactly that. It converted conquest into adventure before film ever had a chance to do the same. By the time Hollywood inherited the cowboy, the lie already had a costume, a stage, and an audience trained to applaud. The legal myth worked the same way. The West is often imagined as chaos gradually tamed by brave lawmen. But order was often a weapon used by the powerful to protect property, punish rivals, and decide who counted as respectable. Vigilante committees did not always arise from pure necessity. In places like San Francisco, elite merchants used the language of law and order to build private authority, hold secret trials, and eliminate political enemies. Public hangings became community rituals. Businesses closed, crowds gathered, families watched. Rope fragments and pieces of clothing became souvenirs, proof that the owner had stood with the side that controlled violence. The lesson was not simply that crime would be punished. The lesson was who had the right to punish. Even the famous bank robbery image collapses under closer inspection. Frontier banks were often among the strongest buildings in town, holding the money of the local elite. They were protected by location, architecture, and a population where many adults were armed. Successful criminals knew better than to attack the most offended box in the center of the most alert street. They targeted stagecoaches, payrolls, trains, and isolated transfers. When the James Younger gang tried robbing the First National Bank in Northfield, Minnesota, in 1876, the town did not behave like a frightened movie crowd. Store owners and citizens armed themselves, surrounded the robbers, and destroyed the gang's plan within minutes. The legend wants lone gunfighters. The reality was more revealing. Ordinary property owners could become brutally organized when their capital was threatened. The frontier line between law and lawlessness was never as clean as the posters made it. Then there was the sound of the land itself. Prairie madness has often been explained as loneliness, weakness, or female fragility. That explanation is too simple and too cruel. The plains were not empty in a peaceful way. They were empty in a way that could press on the nervous system. Endless wind moved over flat land without forests or mountains to break it. Low, frequency vibration, isolation, darkness, hunger, exhaustion, and fear combined inside sod houses that offered shelter, but little comfort. A sod house was made of earth. It leaked mud. It hosted insects. It held damp, darkness, and the constant pressure of weather. During storms, a woman might try to cook while mud dripped from the roof, and children slept under covering to avoid being buried by collapse. During grasshopper plagues, the house itself could become part of the food supply. Cloth, wood, leather, and even the wool on living sheep attacked by insects. Imagine trying to preserve the rituals of home while the home is being eaten. That was not picturesque hardship. That was psychological siege. Women on the frontier were expected to preserve food, treat injuries, bear children, manage scarcity, keep fire, clean filth, ration supplies, and maintain morale in conditions where one spoiled jar, one failed curing process, one winter mistake, or one storm could kill a family. The word stress does not cover it. It was continuous emergencies stretched over years. And still, later myth made them supporting characters in a story about men. The final horror of the Wild West is the speed. A person born on the Great Plains in 1840 could grow up in a world of vast bison herds, indigenous power, grassland systems and rivers, not yet bent to corporate infrastructure. By old age, that same person could see the bison gone. The bones gathered, the rails laid, the open range fenced, the tribes confined, the water seized, the land divided, and the myth already being sold as entertainment. An entire world was altered inside a single lifetime. Not faded, altered, extracted, packaged. That is why the romantic version survives so easily. It is simpler. It gives history a hero shot. It gives the nation a sunset. But the real ledger is different. On one side, the frontier produced rails, mines, farms, towns, fortunes, markets, and a national myth powerful enough to circle the globe. On the other side, it consumed bodies through parasites, cholera, alkali water, silica dust, mine toxins, lye steam, mercury cures, infected wounds, blizzards, hunger, isolation, debt, racial exploitation, ecological collapse, and deliberate starvation policy. The West was not just a place where hard people survived hard conditions. It was a system that made people pay for survival with pieces of their bodies. The cowboy sunset hides that because sunsets are beautiful from a distance. They do not show the lice in the seams. The ash lie in the laundry barrel. The scar tissue in the lungs. The scrip in the miner's pocket. The poisoned pool in the desert. The children frozen near the schoolhouse. The bones stacked by the rail line. Or the stage costume pretending the whole thing was noble. The Wild West was worse than the myth because the myth turned a machine of extraction into a dream of freedom. That is the part history tries hardest to soften. The frontier was not a clean horizon waiting for brave men. It was a meat grinder dressed like a sunset. And once you see the machinery beneath the gold light, the old legend never looks clean again.